This is Pete Moore on Halo Talks. I have the pleasure of having Marc Cohen, a friend of mine for almost 10 years when we started tinkering around with some things in the boutique fitness industry together under a brand that's now on the bench somewhere probably. But you've been a industry veteran. You've helped a lot of companies strategically, operationally, operating under Marc Cohen Fitness, which I guess that URL was available. Might as well go with the brand you've created, which is yourself. So
yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
And let's talk about what's going on in the industry.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. So why don't you give your background so people understand, that you've got credibility from all the things that you've done, and then we'll talk about, what the current events are and
Sure.
what you think the big metrics are.
So yeah, I'm actually a long-time industry guy. Came out of school with a degree in sports medicine with emphasis on economics. I thought I was going to change the world and create fitness accessible for everyone, and got obviously punched in the mouth with the reality that what people wanted and how they were prepared to consume it were different things. Mm-hmm. So over the years, I came to New York. And sort of short form became the vice president of training for David Barton Gym, and we had to take it through a national expansion. And in a way, we had to basically build out all the structure from start to finish. And that became the sort of the template for the rest of my career, because at that point, once you learn how to build something and then you understand the fundamentals of keeping something going, and training people to do that, you can apply that across different settings. And that's actually where you and I met, was when I had stepped away to see, in different platforms. I worked with Camp Shane, I worked with the company you and I worked for, to see different areas in the industry where this way of thinking could be sort of proofed out. Came back in, I worked with Focus Integrated Fitness, and became the director eventually of BFX Studios, which got rolled back up into TSI.
Sure.
And when that happened, I launched, my consulting round 2
Gotcha.
in 2016.
Got it. So from a standpoint of when you go into potential clients and they might say, hey, I've got an issue with, my personal training, but you really kind of go in there and diagnose, well, it's actually not a personal training issue. It's actually, you've got a training issue related to selling memberships, or like you're not marketing properly. So talk about some of like the takeaways of that you've seen, or like clients that you've worked with to say, here's kind of where this consulting, me parachuting in, almost like, that show The Profit, on CNBC, or, somebody like that to come and say, look, I've seen this 100 times.
Right.
Like, let me tell you exactly what the issues are here and how we're going to fix them. And it might not be intuitive to what you think it is. Like there's a bigger problem, or there's like, there's a smaller problem.
Sure, right? So I approach it very much like you'd approach a new training client. It's easy to write up a program for a non-human being, but when they're sitting in front of you, you then have to sort of diagnose and say, listen, you're looking for things that are counterintuitive. You need to be able to explain a little bit more why. And the whys typically lack in these situations. Most positions, most issues come from emotional responses, and there's not necessarily using the clear data. So getting them to understand what they're looking at, getting them to learn to grow as using the assets and the tools and the team that they have is essential. And if a team doesn't see that, you can give them all the answers to the problems. It's like giving someone's behind a bad tree. They hit the ball there, and they're in the woods, and they're just screaming at you. They just want an answer for getting out of the trees. That's all they need. If they could just get out from behind the tree. And you're sitting there going like, you're not supposed to be behind the tree.
Got it. So when you take a look at some of the biggest issues here, I mean, from my standpoint, sales and marketing, this is a sales and marketing engine, and I think a lot of people that got into the boutique fitness space more recently, we're kind of like building almost like the equivalent of like a boutique jewelry store.
Sure.
Think, okay, this looks awesome inside. We don't really need to do much, but there's like a DNA to selling memberships, and maybe you can just kind of talk about what kinds of people need to be doing that, what kind of training they need to have, how you think about the sense of urgency to sell.
Oh my gosh. Well, really, that became really loaded, because you're right. There's the sales and marketing aspect of any organization is important, and you need to be able to speak directly to how you got the leads that you've gotten. You can't get lucky. It has to be a formula. You need to know how to go back to it. I think what you've seen in the boutique industry was that the genesis point of this was the sales funnel. Someone understood innately how to use human behaviors and how to understand to get, like, let's get 3 clicks. And then you mush that with where group exercise has been for the longest time, which was to say we want a sense of community and we're all going to be a team. And the whole boutique movement just became an optimization of technology and this sort of, connection. And it outpaced the standard sort of, I guess, gym way of thinking, which was so dominant that the equipment manufacturers were so dominant that the apparel companies were the same apparel companies for 20 years. And then boutique comes in and has to shatter those norms and is taking their cues from the fashion industry. They're taking their cues from the hotel industry, as we know some of our friends have. And I think the consumer benefited from that, except for the fact that a lot of times it's more palatable now. They like it more, but there's not a lot of juice behind it, right? It's just like, well, let's grab something that we know we can put a package around. And when I'm consulting, I'm looking in those terms because I have to acknowledge the fact that you can't pretend that buying habits aren't what they are. You can't have a product that's hard for people to understand, and you're expecting your sales force to educate everyone involved. That to me sounds like that's a strategy you have behind closed doors. Say this is going to take time. That is not something I want to be doing every day. And that I think you see a lot of. There's still a lot of Band-Aid over the problem, not really being able to think globally. And I think we're going to see more mergers as we go this year, where companies have figured out, because I think over the last couple of years, everyone had a project in the fire, right? Everyone was going to do everything. We're going to have the best sales, we're going to have the best marketing, everyone's going to love us. And now they're going like, look, let's just go find a brand who's figured it out. Let's go find these marketing people. These online advertising doesn't work for everybody. Private training is a very different product than group. And so understanding your business, understanding your client flow, your optimization, your automation, how well can it be deployed in the field? These are just questions that, again, when you're not having a quick conversation like this, they need to be answered. And having the bandwidth sometimes to do that can be tough, admittedly.
Yeah. So when you look at you meet with a new studio operator or a health club operator, in my case, somebody has a 15,000 square foot facility and they're telling me that they get, 30 to 40 new membership sales a month. And I'm like, you need some rocket fuel on this thing. And like, that's not something you can tell me, but that's not something that you should be proud of, and it's not something that shows that you're actually investing.
Telling me why that's working for you is not the answer, right? That's not where you're going to be. You're answering it away. So let's go find out why is it there.
Yeah, because a number of people say, "Well, my advertising expense." I'm like, "Well, is your advertising and marketing investment?" Because it's not really an expense. Like it's actually a requirement in order to get people in the door.
One of the key pillars. If you have say 3 or 4. One is going to be the actual product and operations of it. One is going to be your build out costs and construction, make sure you didn't rent, those kinds of things. Your marketing funnel, and lastly is your hiring and development. You have to have all 4 of those avenues really pegged before you can hope to have success.
Yeah. So when you look at somebody who's a 1 or 2 studio or 1 or 2 health club operator, there's no way that they could bring on director of marketing, director of training. So how do you? Obviously, they could bring you on to say, okay, here's what you could set up, but how do you tell those people, look, you either got to grow or you got to become part of a franchise, or what do you think some of the solutions are?
Well,
being undersized,
I think first is to sort of have an understanding of the total strategy. Where are you trying to go? To your point, are we trying to franchise, grow, sell? You're going to keep these units. And then looking at where you are with your resources and then identifying the plan to change that. You're not going to be able to launch with full marketing capabilities and everything else. So what are the essentials of the product? How can you, create simplicity? And then where are you going to go ahead and draw funding down? Is it something, everybody in their head starts with self-funding, or they have this disillusion that someone's going to give them a bunch of money and just take them away from it all. And I'm like, it's neither. So you're going to have to figure out how to get from here to the point where you've extracted yourself from the operation, where things can really run smoothly. And then you now have a real business. And then that business can be scaled, profitable, sold, whatever you want to go do with it. But you better get your foundation straight, because otherwise you're going to be selling people a story, and eventually that's going to catch up to you.
Yeah. So when you go in and you see somebody, let's just take this example of, doing 40, new memberships a month and probably losing 35 or something, and kind of just saying I'm hustling, I'm doing as best I can. How do you come in and basically try to educate someone on, like, you need the DNA. Your DNA might not be in sales and marketing, and maybe you shouldn't be in this business, or it needs to be.
It's accounted for. You're not the first person to struggle with it, and you don't need to go out of business because you're not good at it, but you need to identify that and come up with your plan.
Right.
And that's what I'd like to be a part of, right? So I'm not suggesting I'm a solution for anyone. What I'm just suggesting is that you got to come up with a plan, whether that's bringing someone in or just creating a different marketing scheme that becomes, and then how you're going to use that, to your point, as an investment to get where you're going to go, not just throwing money at an endless hole. Obviously, we're talking about CRM, and those are things there.
Right.
And again, that to me, that comes back to, like, what are your best practices? What are you deploying? There's obviously a lot of automation that can be done. What's the stance of your company? Do you have some kind of weird manpower heavy version of CRM that you're running and it's not working for you? But again, I just think when you start unpacking where they are, they tend to be able to get themselves to the right answer, because they'll realize I remember 10, 20 years ago, I was talking with somebody and he had made a lot of weird decisions, and it just turned out like he just had bad people under him. And when he came up with a strategy for not changing the people, but how he deployed things, he had a ton of success. So a lot of times it's not scrapping everything, to your point, it's changing perspective and then bringing in the people, or trying to create some sort of network for them to get the resources. And depending on the size of the company, that can be easy or difficult.
Mm-hmm. So let's flip over into the operation side, into the boutique studios, and some of the metrics that we've been looking at, is more like an airline, where every time you got a class, it's basically like the equivalent of a JetBlue flight from New York to Fort Lauderdale. And it's like, okay, I got an X number of seats on the plane. I got X number of spots to fill, and you don't see a flight on JetBlue with, 2 pilots and 8 flight attendants, or, whatever names the stewardess or stewards. You see 2, and you see maybe 2 to 3, because they're looking at, hey, what's my payroll cost? What's my fuel cost? What's my load capacity? How do you kind of break down for people, one, maybe they're on too much class pass and they don't know it, so their revenue per visit is the issue, or it's like, hey, you've got this awesome experience, but you've got way too many people, way too many trainers on the floor. How do you kind of go in there and gently or directly say, hey, look, let me tell you where the costs are, and here's what your revenue should be, and this is not normal.
Yeah, so that's the first part, right, is where the costs are, what's normal, understanding the data. So it's breaking down what our capacity is, and then where is our usage on that. So how much total people can we have in a space at any one given time, and then what's our ability to drive to that number. And then obviously, if you want to even take it a step further, would be are we getting the right price per head in that, for the time slots and everything else. And there's a lot of software and technology that can plug in and create surge pricing and things of that nature. That's all sort of going to come and continue to come. But I think in looking at to make sure that, I guess, once you've sort of committed to the model and you're in business, like if you're a boxing studio, you're a boxing studio. I think me coming in and telling you to become a spin studio is a little crazy. They're just not going to listen to that. I don't even care if it's right. So I think when you start to look at what are the tools that you have operationally? How many people can you fit in the space? Can you change that through your layout? Are there ways that you can move people through the space more effectively? We see a lot of circuits right now. Obviously, a lot of zones, a lot of people, moving in little segments and teams. You're able to obviously get way more people into a space if they're working in that way. But again, you still got to go take that class. You got to go see that experience, because a lot of times you'd be like, they're able to put a ton of people in here. The model fleshes out. They're able to get a lot of leads into the class, but they can't keep people worth a dang because the experience is just not right. And then conversely, you have companies who are throwing a lot of people at the problem. Like, look, it's experience driven. Let's throw more people, more touch points. We'll make sure we're saying hi to everybody. Well, in personal training, we learned a long time ago, you needed to learn how to speak with people, but you are not going to renew people with a whole bunch of excessive hellos, and it was going to drain the company. So how can you use technology to make sure that their experience is seamless and where you're using people is appropriate? And again, it's going to become a situation where it's going to come from the ground up. Someone probably who's limited on staff is really just going to figure out good ways to use these tools together and avoid some of the trappings of getting too cheeky, I think, operationally, to try to create a unique selling position. But there's no doubt you need something for sure.
Yeah, so you spent 5 years at David Barton, which is probably known as one of the largest, personal training grossing entities,
Sure.
In history of the health club industry. So, what are some of the takeaways, or what are some of the things that you either put in place or had, besides just the, I get the highs and hellos is not going to get you. Obviously,
no.
Was there like a script? Was there?
No, it's a good point, right? So a lot of this sort of stems from that experience.
Yeah.
Well, I say one is you targeted the right client. Like we were speaking to people who really wanted to look better, people who wanted to be in the gym, people who really wanted to use a trainer. And when they got to us, whether they decided to use the trainer or not, like they came in understanding that that's what we thought was in everyone's best interest. So it was a culture of that everyone should be using a coach. And then from the team's perspective, coaching them to say, there's somebody in front of you, they're relying on you to create change. And our job is to get them there, whether they're here once a week or 5 times a week. You're supposed to listen to people and help them. So I want you to just be honest. And if Pete needs to come in 6 days a week, tell him. And then find a way to get where he is, but at the same time, let's not lie and say, yeah, once a week, I'll get you to look like Brad Pitt in Fight Club. It wasn't going to happen. And I think it was those two mutual things, the staff understanding their mission, and then from a sales and marketing flow, going and having a really effective campaigning to be about something specific, to make something cool and drive people in the door. He did an amazing job at that. And structurally, I'll say, having training memberships was really helpful because instead of PACs. Well, it's not even so much that. It was the fact that when you trained with the trainer, you didn't pay for the membership. So when you talk about having a great selling tool for, at that point, a very traditional sales force, they were selling, people were selling it. It was a great message for them. It made sense. I wasn't interested in your gym membership. I really wanted you to have results. And if you were willing to train with me at a frequency that I thought improved those odds, why wouldn't I get more in with that?
Right.
And so I think David had kind of come upon that. I sort of pushed to reinstitute it and really kind of just install it. And that really helped. And then we just worked on doing a better job at understanding our consumer and setting them up with the appropriate experience. And now you're automating that. You're not using a salesperson anymore. You're going to have an entry form maybe on your website. It's going to tell you about this person, and that's going to direct them to the class or the individual that you think they should be going with. And you're going to cut down a huge expense in every company. You'll be able to put that back into whether that's more marketing or hopefully more maintenance for your facility.
I feel like people collect this information at the point of sale, but I don't feel like they really use it to say, okay, whether it's like an algorithm to say, hey, Marc's the best person, or no, or David's the best personal trainer, because like it looks like both of these guys, as an example, played soccer together, or they went to the same school, or they, have the same hobbies. They both like the Giants. Like I feel like sometimes clubs are getting this information, but not really using it and stopping.
No
like
question.
I was standing in my office the other day, and I was looking out the window, and someone's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking. I just want to think for a second. Like I'm actually not doing anything except just thinking." So, like, how do you think about, or how do you tell people, like, look, it's great that you collected data, and it's great that you can like share it with me, but you actually have to like use this shit on like a daily basis and like understand what it means, and then also like use it to like connect dots.
Yeah. First off, thinking is a very underrated experience, I think, in our world. I'm a big fan of getting information and sitting on it. Like I need to digest it and work my way through it because we're trying to come up with solutions. So I think first and foremost, I think you've got to see this information. You've got to be able to think about it. And a lot of times people just weaponize it, right? You're going to take whatever number or data point you can and say, this is what I think, because you're trying to, again, influence something. And again, that's going to come back to, what's the mission purpose? What are you trying to do there? Now with that, think about this data. So what does it mean when, we have people who are coming in and to your point, they have similar likings to so-and-so or so-and-so, or how can we, I always ask, like, don't ask a question that you don't need an answer for. It's obnoxious. So if you're going to ask a 20-question quiz, you better use all 20 of those points.
That's great.
It's think about like the instructor who asks you about your injury at the beginning of class and doesn't come over to you afterwards. And who's connected to that injury in the long term? Nobody. So stop kicking up those rocks and saying, okay, these are the things that we think are most fundamental.
Right.
Drawing those down to something where you've probably used some data to support that. I was met with Adam Greenfeld, right? Greenberg, nootropics guy.
Yeah, sure.
And the way that they were able to condense sort of some information, come up with sort of a concise sort of this, we think these kinds of things are really, really better. I go, that's what you always come into. Like the choices are infinite, but when you have experience and you try things out, you start to realize that most of these, these handful of things are going to work more often than not. And again, I think it gives people some confidence to go, okay, we can do that. We can look at the data in those terms.
Yeah. When you take a look at, somebody had a small studio and they sent us all the data, and I came back and told them what the situation was with like why their drops were out of whack and, terminations and this and that. And then I stopped and I said, instead of listening to what the data says, why don't you just fucking listen to what the member says?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that there's like this disconnect between almost like, I like the term that you just stated, I'm going to use it if that's okay, weaponize the data. I like that. Where like they kind of get so ingrained in like what the numbers say and what the Excel outputs
their
are.
mission. So they're going to create confirmational bias with those numbers. They're going to be like, okay, look, this is what's important. And you're like,
why don't I just go into the location, like talk to everybody and like get
100%.
like, what's the pulse or what's the situation?
It's the balance of those two things, right? So I don't want to make decisions on my site visits. It's dangerous because I could be misled by what my eyes just showed me.
Interesting.
But it's going to tip me off. I can see when trainers are slouching and salespeople are just kind of chatting with each other and the front desk is asleep. I can already know where to go with the data. So now when I look at that data, it's sort of reinforcing things. And conversely, especially with a smaller company, I was talking to some investors who were looking at making a large purchase, about 15, 20 clubs. And I said, well, look, here's the thing, is that if you're going to move on this position, and I can tell you now that about 10 or 20 of these clubs easily could be controlled by 2 or 3 different people. And if what you're seeing right now is returns by these 2 or 3 fantastic employees, you could be getting hoodwinked right now. You need to know, like, what is fundamentally this company's position, like what are they responsible for versus like who are these key players? And you obviously can flip that and say, hey, in a negative, do you have the wrong people in? I think it's important to remember, it's not just what you see, it's the data, it's not just the data, it's what you see.
Yep.
And be leery of someone who's trying to like sway you one way or the other.
Flipping into like somebody who, maybe got into the industry, feels overwhelmed, didn't put the right amount of capital on a balance sheet, doesn't do marketing. How do you, what's your response to basically telling someone like, shut it down?
I was just going to say, like, I was like, I didn't know if it was, I thought it was a setup because I was like, you're supposed to shut that down.
No,
like,
I mean, it's like restaurants close every fucking day.
No, it's okay. All right, cool.
It's like they don't have to exist.
I thought you were going to try to ask me how to like get them out of the hole because I was like, no. I don't
guess
do that.
Maybe like talk for a minute, just giving your background to say like, look, maybe there's not a spot for this, or maybe like the rent's too high, or
no, I'm mean. I'm really, really, really mean and direct.
All right, it's great. I'm glad we saved it to the end, so we can just hook people into the podcast without them getting pissed at you.
It's it's their baby, but like, you're not an idiot. You're sitting across from me. You're having this conversation, and you've seen your product every damn day, and I'm sitting here, right? So you
didn't come in here for growth. You came in here for me to tell you that what the doctor says.
Right. So I'll talk to you a little bit about some ways to like buy you some time, like what's going to be the strategy, but there's nobody going to start selling you on like, you're going to turn this thing around. You and Johnny are just going to, I've had a conversation with an owner, and it was that kind of a situation. And I said, if you stepped away for 6 months, this will be gone. And I said, because in essence, he turned into that diner owner who was working, 65 hours a week to keep the place afloat. Can't even get rid of his business because no one's going to step in and do 65 hours to make it work. And that's what we talk about. If you do not, from the start, learn how to extract yourself from the day-to-day operations from this, you're not in business. You're like me. You're just an independent contractor floating around, like, whatever. I can't sell me any more than you can sell that.
Right. Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand, look, if I go and buy a McDonald's, like that thing better make money, right? I mean, like that's an operation that's been proven. It's tried and true. Like there's metrics and a scorecard and a playbook. But if you're starting up your own fitness studio or your own new gym hybrid, like you are doing an experiment.
You better be saying that you know something that everybody else doesn't. Yeah, you're uniquely equipped to pull this off for a reason. I mean, we already know the odds are against you. So how an adult can look in the mirror and go like, yeah, but not me. You just have to, why?
Yeah. And also like if you're, if you have 2 or 3 locations and you tell me that not any of those locations are the prototype, and the next one's going to be the prototype. Like, that's really hard capital to go and find when someone's like, you know, okay, you're kind of 0 for 3 and you kind of like, you know, bunted your way, you know, each time, you know, you're still 0 for 3. I like, at some point you got to like be true to yourself and not overly try to convince yourself that like there's this awesome opportunity that's going to change the business.
At least not in a couple of years. You know, it's going to be about 5 years out, because there's always a way to like for you to, you know, as long as you're not bleeding cash and, you know, you're just not effective, you know, then you can like, okay, like how can we do this over time to get where we want to go?
Yeah.
And sometimes, actually most of the time they're not interested, because by the time they get to you, they're tired. Mm-hmm. They feel like they're looking for a partner. They're looking for some help. You know how that story goes. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, you and everybody else. And then that's when it comes and they look at me and they're like, well, would you be interested in, and I'm like, I've got to find a nice way to back down, because, you know, I'm not. I love everybody out there. I wish them nothing but the best. I want to help everyone succeed. Mm-hmm. I really believe in them. But my spidey sense is pretty strong at this point in my career, and I am an individual. So like, I feel like that's my bonus to you, is my honesty. Right. Like, I live and die by everything I say. And so I'm invested in making sure that I get you the best information I possibly can. So when I tell you, hey, look, I don't think this is great, or I really believe in this thing, I mean it. There's no fluff behind that.
Yeah, that's great. What's the most important advice that you're giving to people today? Like, as you go into a new relationship, like, what are some of the things that are either like whether it's like Peloton and technology, or whether it's marketing and sales, or whether it's digital? Or
one is, you better know your product. Don't ask me to define that for you. 2, use structure. Yeah. You know, so if you don't have your product and I'm not right, and you're just guessing and you just want people to help you make $1 million because you don't know what you're doing, and I'm zero part of that. But if you love your thing, then let's put structure down now. Let's not wait. And then how to balance. My experience with TSI taught me, like, they were so big and they were always worried about scaling from day one. So much so that they did not take care of the things essential to launching. So to your point about like getting out of the box and having some underperformers and then no one wants to contribute is a great example of where I saw that. So I'd agree to structure and making sure that you have a plan for marketing, hiring, construction, and deployment. I mean, that's it.
Great. So Marc, you know, as you see over the next couple of years where the industry's going, and you know, we use our term halo. Obviously, you got a lot of investors that you've been meeting with to say, hey, you know, what do you think of this? So, kind of, what's your crystal ball of, you know, who survives? Not name necessarily, but you know, like, kind of, where do you see everything going?
Yeah, I do believe it's going to condense. I do believe that the shift of the investment market has gone to like a little bit more proven models. There's enough stuff out there now to go find something that's got a little more traction before you get behind it. I think seed money is definitely drying up as far as just overall. It's never going to be dry, but you know what I mean? It's not just going to be as thrown at it. And then there'll be a lot more condensing of ideas. There's going to be a lot more people involved on the deal side trying to see ways to sort of get through. And we started seeing it, I think, already in the sort of the later part of this year. And I think you're just going to see a lot more of that next year. And at some point, you'll see not just access to the general public, but the quality of what they're getting is going to improve. Because in the rest of the country, outside of the coast, it's a very different energy and vibe. And they're a little bit, I think, left behind. And we'll see how that plays out in the next year or two.
Gotcha. Great. Well, good to reconnect with you. Thanks for being on.
You as well, man. Thank you.
Marc Cohen Fitness. We'll have his information up there if you need some help and you need an honest opinion. He's our guy. And look forward to looking at new business models with you and trying to help people succeed.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate you guys having me.
Awesome.